Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints, just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Continuing our run through Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we're up to the episode called Let He Who Is Without Sin... It is the 7th episode of the 5th season, aired on November 11th, 1996. It was written by Ira Steven Behr and Robert Hewitt Wolfe, directed by Renee Auberjonois. In this episode, while Worf, Dax, Bashir, Lita, and Quark vacation on Risa, Worf decides to join a radical fundamentalist group determined to start a political revolution on Risa. We're joined by Clay. Clay, how are you?
I'm good. Do you remember years ago the commercials on the radio all the time, always on like, usually it was like Jammin' 94.5 or Kiss 108 for Hedonism 3.
What were the ads for?
It's the name of the place was called Hedonism. It was basically like an
island, like a Caribbean vacation resort.
Yeah, a vacation, Caribbean fuck vacation.
I think basically. I do remember that. Yeah.
I feel like the writers of this episode must have been listening to a lot of those ads because this episode's gross.
Watching a lot of Paradise Isle or whatever that show was on Fox, or it's like people are just having sex with each other and then voting each other off.
Well, there's a new one on USA now about a bunch of couples that go to like Temptation Island that's full of sexy singles trying to break them up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, maybe that was a backdoor pilot for this, or this was a backdoor pilot for that. I don't know.
Stop saying backdoor. Please stop saying backdoor.
Yeah. It also reminds me of one of my favorite things from Arrested Development when Job is trying to pitch ideas to
City.
I think it's Sitwell. He's like, guess what? You're in Fuck City. That's how I imagine the pitch meeting for this episode went.
Sun Valley. It sounds like salad dressing. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Let He Who Is Without Sin, which is a controversial episode, but it's so sexy. But anyway, we're going to take a break, play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back and break down Let He Who Is Without Sin.
That wasn't very nice.
Why? Is there something of hers you want?
Arandis was Curzon's lover, not mine.
I hope you remember that.
You're still angry about Captain Baudet.
If I am angry, it is because you do not take our relationship seriously.
Or if we just got here, do we have to start arguing again?
If you were a Klingon woman, we would already be married.
In case you haven't noticed, I am not a Klingon woman.
That is no excuse. I have been loyal to you. And I expect you to be loyal to me in return.
I have been loyal to you, but I'm not going to let you run my life.
I'm not trying to run your life.
Then I'm going to go and have a big glass of eichelberry juice.
That is a mistake. You are allergic to eichelberry juice. It makes your spots itch.
But I like the taste.
Fine. Have as much eichelberry juice as you like, but it is still a mistake.
But it is my mistake to make.
All right, so here we are. The 7th episode of the 5th season. 5th season has felt very odd to me so far. Compared to the 4th season, I guess I'll lead off with this point. What was funny, Clay, about the 4th season is that going in, didn't know much about it. I kind of remembered it being good. What kind of blew me away was the consistency of the 4th season. And it's really kind of a weird, fluky year for the show. Not that the other seasons are bad by any stretch, but there was no really terrible episodes in the previous season. The worst we had a couple 2s that were in there. And it's weird. Season 5 has started off and it feels like it's a little bit all over the place for me, which brings us to this point, which is Let He Who Is Without Sin, which is probably the biggest failure of an episode the show has done in a long time. It's a weird one. I don't know where to go. Although at the same time, I feel I can defend this episode on some level. I feel like I understand what is trying to happen and it's just not coming together. And I don't know if that makes it better or makes it a noble failure or anything, but what do you think about this?
I really disliked this episode quite a bit.
There you go.
I don't know. I don't like it when Star Trek attempts to do, or maybe this is sort of the first time they did it, but this was an episode that made me feel like, why is this a Star Trek episode? It's about some couples going to a resort and then some fundamentalist Christians showing up and saying, like, you guys got to stop showing your tits to everybody. And it's basically they go to Jamaica and Worf spends the whole time in his hotel room watching Fox News.
Right.
And for the concept you have in your show, why waste an episode doing this? I didn't find anything like. First off, I stand by what I said. This episode's gross. Like, it's not even like fun, sexy. It's just gross.
Yeah.
And there's so much just non-Star Trek stupid, morality going back and forth. That's just like they're just using the Star Trek as a cover. They're not actually. This isn't a Star Trek story. It's a story with Star Trek trappings. And then it culminates with Worf giving the "I shot a kid" monologue from Die Hard. And it's just like, I don't know. What the hell are we doing here?
I can't. We'll get to it, but I can't really defend Worf's soccer story. That's pretty much
that was the worst written speech I've ever heard in a TV show. It sounded like it was written for a 6th grade play.
It's
like at any point when in your life have you said anything that sounds like it was at that point that I turned around, filled to the brim with excitement, and I looked at who the fucking talks like that? Nobody talks like that.
I think it's funny to have Worf say corner kick. He's like, I was lining up to defend it.
His soccer language is very accurate. Maybe he jumped up to head. The one that stood out to me was he said, I jumped up to head the ball. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that is what you call it, I guess.
We'll get back to Worf and his story. I think that, this is operating against a couple tough issues for the show. Like, Star Trek doesn't do sex very well. This feels like to me like it's that modern meme of TNG says, boy, we don't do sexy episodes very well. After the 2nd season, let's stop doing them. And DS9 says, hold my beer for me. And it's like, we're just going to do some sexy episodes. They occasionally, they don't ever succeed at it. The best they would do would be something like Looking for Parmok, which we just watched, which is kind of like a lighthearted little comedy. It doesn't lean into the sex aspect of it. It's more about like the relationships going on. It's kind of funny and silly and stupid. This one runs into the brick wall of, you can't show sexy stuff on syndicated TV for this. And it doesn't fit the tone of Trek to do it. Like, no one ever talks about it comes off as so bizarre where no one in the universe really ever talks about sex. And even in this episode, they have a hard time talking about sex. They use like euphemisms, or they just kind of wink at each other, even though the episode is built all around it. And it comes out of nowhere so hard. Okay, so it comes out of nowhere. Does
it, Wes?
And you're left with a bit of a mess on your hands.
Yeah.
So I think that the problem with it is it runs into this brick wall of like, Star Trek isn't sexy, and they're trying to do a show about something that you can't do on this show. So it's a failure from the start in terms of a concept.
Yeah, I would agree. Like part of me feels okay about what they're trying to do as far as Worf's character goes.
I think this totally fits Worf's character. I would actually defend.
I think it does too.
I would defend the way that Worf is written in this episode. I think that the problem is everything around Worf is not really suited to what you're trying to say about Worf.
Yes, I would agree. I think Worf's arc in this episode makes sense, except I think it makes sense. I think what they're trying to do is consistent with him and makes sense. But I would have preferred Worf, the main struggle that Worf has in this episode, I would have preferred it to come from something he's actually doing instead of something he's not doing. So
yeah, do you want to flesh that out? Yeah.
Yeah, instead of going down to Sex Planet and just being a prude the whole time, I think I probably would have preferred it if they were on Deep Space Nine and these fundamentalist guys showed up and Worf is actually letting himself go with Dax. Like, they're screwing all the time. That's apparently established at the beginning.
Yeah, 7 times a month.
He's having a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's starting to loosen up, and then these guys show up and and make him realize that maybe he shouldn't be doing this and feeling bad about himself. Not instead of just being a stick in the mud and just ruining it for everybody else because he can't have a good time.
That's
like I would much prefer. I mean, and also the way that they start criticizing everybody on the planet is, you guys are down here on this sex planet when you've got holodecks and replicators up on the so you don't mind if they go up and they have holodecks weird sex.
Yes,
you just don't want it to happen on this planet. Like if these guys came on the Deep Space Nine and were like, guys, stop fucking around, stop going to bars, stop going to holodecks, stop screwing your friends or screwing your girlfriends. The Dominion are out there and they're coming. You have to get back to what the Federation means, that kind of stuff. I feel like that would be more effective because it's a situation that we're familiar with. It's commenting on things that we have been living with as the audience. We've come to accept as stuff that people just do. And you've got characters, your main character who's having a conflict actually participating in the story instead of just,
wet blanketing his way through I think that there's a lot of things that go wrong. I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that you can do this on Risa. The problem is ultimately that Worf becomes a terrorist at a certain point and destroys a weather system in the name of whatever the fuck he thinks he's believing. And the other, I think that the one of the bigger problems maybe with this happening on Risa to me is that because this fundamentalist group, the Essentialists, have shown up there, the Risans have a sort of non-hostile take towards them, which I guess makes sense in terms of Risa, but it also makes them seem, this Essentialist group seems so inept and boring. Like there's no threat to them whatsoever. Like people don't really care about them. And the leader of them is maybe the worst villain in Star Trek history. Like he's awful.
He's awful.
There's really nothing going on for him. He's got nothing to do.
He sounds like the worst aspects of my post Fox News father. Because he's the person that says, I never go to the movies, people get shot at the movies. Like that's his whole ethos is basically, Sean Hannity out in the world.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but they're interesting because I guess when you talk about them, I don't really know what they're fundamentalist about because they claim to be sort of fundamentalist Federation types, but I feel like what the Federation is built on is all about what Risa represents. Maybe not the sex, but the sort of in the freedom of it. They feel more like they're harbingers for the Dominion than anything else. They don't feel like they fundamentally believe in the Federation, and they don't come across as their hint, the symbolism is supposed to be that they're basically religious conservatives, but they don't have any religious angle to them. They're just he calls himself an academic, and the Federation, apparently, he's more concerned that they're not ready for war, and he has very his concerns about what people are doing instead of prepping for war just feels like they're a little bit detached from each other because they're not tied to any sort of greater mythology or mythos that would be aware of. So he seems like he's just some random dude showing up he's not getting any, so he doesn't want anybody else to get any, and that's about it.
Yeah, and I think they run into a problem because they need something. They need to present him as being fundamentalist towards something that we can recognize because Worf needs to be affected by it. And so it needs to be something that he cares about. And they can't use God because God doesn't really exist so much.
God's an alien in this series. Yeah, you can understand what God is. Yeah. Yeah.
So they choose Starfleet, which is a recognizable thing, except they're not, it's not like, this might be more interesting if it was an accurate potential indictment of how much the show has changed. Like if you have this guy who, basically you're pitting your classic Roddenberry thing versus your more modern Deep Space Nine thing. Sure. If it was a bit of a skewed perspective of that, where they're actually butting the heads of the two kind of different show philosophies together, that would be something. But this Starfleet that he keeps referencing is not something that exists or ever has existed as far as we know. Although maybe he's referencing the Starfleet from Discovery. I don't know.
I mean,
because it seems very similar.
The thing about,
but at the same time, it's kind of accurate to the way that these people work in real life. Like if you look at the analog of this guy in real life, he's less of a fundamentalist Christian as much as he is, not to harp on it, kind of like a pro-Trump Republican, right? Because he's more of a trust the government and you have to get back to doing what the government says kind of thing. He's one of those people more than he is necessarily like a, you need, as the woman so eloquently says in Bad Boys 2, you motherfuckers need Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, so if you go off of, so I mean, the problem there, though, the way that I feel like I could defend the episode is that his concerns about the Dominion and like the security of the Federation make sense to me. And DS9 itself has been hinting at this.
Do you think they should build a wall, Wes?
It's tougher in 3D space, but if they build an iron bar fence, I think we're onto something. I think that, the show itself has been hinting all the way back to The Search, which is the one where they meet the founders and they go through that like sort of mental program to see the founders want to see how they'll react to an invasion. That implied Cisco has little faith in what the Federation will be able to handle if it runs into something. They've been hinting at this all through the series. So what this guy... I like your idea of bringing it back to the station because I think that would fix that. And if you made this, I don't know, if you removed it from the goofy, just they're on a sex planet where no one's really having sex, everyone's wearing bathing suits that are like cover a lot. Like this is not a very erotic place, Risa, in terms of what the show can show us. But if you remove them from that and you do a little bit more of a subtle job of linking Worf's relationship problems to his sort of fear of the Federation unraveling because Worf's a stickler for the rules and he likes the sort of like the honor bound stuff, I think you can save what's going on. Yeah. The problem I have with Worf, to bring it back to Worf, is that while the arc and everything makes sense for Worf, like I think that this is something he would do. He runs into the problem at the end where he basically causes a terrorist act that destroys a weather system. His thing with Dax is strange because while I totally understand Worf's point of view, especially from this like Klingon point of view of like, I don't want you sort of going out there and seeing your ex-girlfriend and all that stuff. Dax, in a more mature show, there you could build the Dax character a little bit differently. Dax is giving him nothing here. Like there's no reason that he should be so suspicious of her. Right. And so it just keeps...
You mean you wouldn't feel weird if you walked in on your wife caressing a giant mound of clay? Not me, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Running through her fingers. I would have thrown that hanging... the lace curtains that they've hung up all over the place and gotten the hell out of there. You know what I mean? I think that in a more mature show, you could actually build them so that Dax has a little bit of a personality that is contradictory to Worf, and you could actually understand where his problem is coming from. It feels like to me in this episode, he lists a lot of stuff that we don't see. She has lunch with some captain that we don't see, and stuff like that. Worf really comes across as a dick, not because I think he's wrong, because I think jealousy is a totally natural thing that Worf should undergo in this, but Dax is being so innocent about everything that it's hard to really buy into Worf, what Worf is trying to sell.
Yeah, and I think it's totally fair that they come at it from kind of a cultural angle too, as far as Worf's idea of what Klingon women are supposed to do and how that. And
totally
I think that I actually... What's that?
Totally in character for him. He's concerned about what he thinks a Klingon woman should do.
Yeah, and I think that whole thing, I thought that was the best through line of the episode, because I think the payoff of that is great when, or it is partially great anyway, when they get into that argument and Dax basically calls him on his bullshit, being like, dude, you're barely a Klingon.
I've met more Klingons than you.
I've spent more time with Klingons than you have. Like that. I really enjoyed that they called him on that. I thought that was good. Because, it amplifies that all of these things that he's feeling are based on essentially him reading the Klingon book of how relationships work, as opposed to actually enjoying or actually having a relationship. And it's like I think bringing up this aspect of him being so uptight is good, because I think we've mentioned that kind of before, where he's very much not a fully formed Klingon. He's a hipster Klingon who just gloms on to the he's like a guy. He's like a white guy in his 20s who really loves Japanese culture.
Yeah.
So he always dresses like a samurai, but has no concept of what any of that stuff actually means and like the other side of how those people actually lived. So Worf he's really into presenting as a Klingon, but he's forgetting that there's this whole other side where they are very passionate, and they do like 90% of the time we're introduced to Klingons is them going, blah!
I know they're drunk,
like
throwing
drinks and shit. You know, it's not being a fucking uptight asshole.
Darren,
so I
who's
like
been
that
on,
stuff.
Well, Darren, who's been on the show, writes it as Worf is basically he's the most and least Klingon character.
Yes, yeah,
like
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
He is. He's more honorable than most of them, so he sort of buys into their sort of their structure of how life should be. But he also has trouble just living it up, like a lot of them seem to have no problem doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I like that part of it. But I think overall, you could have couched that in a more relatable story as far as like the location and the actual problem, and it's just. It doesn't work for me overall.
You know, the original idea, what they wanted to do before, I always find excuses like this weird because the producers afterwards have said that the problem they ran into is that they couldn't show sex on TV like this, and it's like, well, you guys should kind of know this at this point.
When did this episode come out?
96.
Oh, okay, all right.
So the original idea was that they really wanted to show this conflict of what sex would be like in the 24th century. And I think you get a hint of it here where everyone seems very open to swinging in this episode. Like everyone's kind of cool with other people having sex with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think the original idea would have been like, does it make sense? Is that a future that is possible and would it be like unproblematic for our characters on this show to go through that? And I think you still see the bones of that story there. And Worf would be the real stickler character who I don't even, like, if that was the story, I wouldn't even really have a problem with Worf's point of view. Like, I would wonder if that was the story, how many people would start sort of like promoting the sort of like free love lifestyle thing. And I think that the episode in that case would have something really interesting to like discuss and talk about. They stay away from it. And instead we get, too many characters. Like, in my opinion, I don't know why Bashir, Lita, and Quark are here in this episode. I would have rather just focused on Worf. So you get distracted by these other characters. You get distracted by these sort of breakup and other people having sex and Lita showing her tits basically in the massage parlor, and then Bashir's kissing that woman on the beach. And it's all this G-rated stuff going on. And it feels, I watch it and I feel sort of like if I was hanging out with like my parents and uncles and they all just started like making out at family gatherings. Yeah. It's kind of like God, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, I felt the exact same way. That's why I think it just feels so gross because it's just a really, it's like, it's like when you watch one of those when you're a kid, where you're younger and you stay up late and you watch one of those episodes of Real Sex on HBO, and you're like, "Oh man, this is gonna be great. This is gonna see boobs. It's gonna be amazing."
This is adult content right here, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's just like a 40 minutes about some weird nudist yoga over 50 community.
Yeah, octogenarian who like to run around naked with body paint. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's not exactly what you thought you were getting. I think that kind of falls into the same category with me as why I wish they had put it on Deep Space Nine, because I think the problem with dealing with that or approaching it from that manner on this weird sex planet is that it makes you're making the sex planet like exceptional.
Yes.
So It's like you've got these uptight Starfleet people who go down to the sex planet and let loose. That's not really addressing what you're trying to say.
Right. It's like a real life holodeck in some ways. Like it only exists in this very limited aspect. And you don't appreciate what they're doing on a societal level. You just say, well, when you go to this planet, everyone basically wears a condom at all times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if they had put this on Deep Space Nine, Yeah, and still had similar kind of relationships, probably a little bit more subdued. Well, I mean, it's not they're not really not subdued here, but
yeah.
You know what I mean. Like if you could still do the interactions with Bashir and Lita.
I didn't even realize they were dating
down
at this
them.
point. I feel like I missed something there. I didn't remember that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah,
I thought she was dating. Was she not dating Jake, or is that a different Dabo girl?
Different Dabo girl.
Oh. You could still do all the stuff with them on Deep Space Nine and still have Worf like looking down on them and sort of judging them.
Yeah.
But just have that process they're going through just happen on Deep Space Nine. And because there's no reason why it would need to be any different.
This also feels like it should be a sect of Bajoran religion culture.
Yeah.
You know, like that would ground it a little bit more for me than just some abstract guys in gray jackets coming around telling you things. Like,
yeah.
If this was built out of the Bajoran religious angle, I think I would have a little bit of an easier time buying into what they're selling as opposed to here where it's more of a mental gymnastics they have to go through. But I agree that DS9 would ground it a little bit more. You'd have a little bit more of a... I also feel like it would be more believable that these people would be allowed to exist on DS9 because Cisco would have sort of a hands tied, like, well, I can't kick them out because they haven't done anything to us, where the Ryzens, it feels like they're trespassing on a vacation property, and I feel like they should be told to get the fuck out of here.
Well, I was thinking the exact same thing. That's why the whole time they were on the screen, I'm thinking, where are these guys staying? Are they paying to stay here? Are they on the resort?
Yeah.
Like, are they walking around giving everybody bullshit during the day, but they're still also like showing up at the same group dinner at the end of the day? You know, like it brought up too many questions for me. Whereas if they were just on Deep Space Nine is sort of a catch-all by nature.
Yeah, open
so
ports.
You would expect. Yeah, you would expect these kind of people to come through, you know?
The other thing that I think is really funny about this episode, we'll do this and then get to Worf's little story because it's goofy as hell, but I think that the structure of this episode really kind of sucks. The pacing is pretty terrible. I always laugh at the Worf arrives on the thing and he's like, all right, Dax, I'm going to go change into my swimsuit. He's in his room. A guy just bursts in and says, I'm a fundamentalist. Will you listen to me?
Yes.
Worf goes, yes.
Yes.
They just have to, they couldn't come up with a more natural way for this guy to meet Worf, like at the bar or something like that. Like he comes into his room and just kicks the door down and is like, listen to me, I'm here.
Yeah, that stuff just, it felt so weird and so forced. And again, it was like the stuff he was selling was like, it was like if you're on vacation, somebody knocks on your door and is like, hey, we're having a meeting of the United Socialist Party or something like that. Here's some literature.
Would you like
and
to
you're like,
come
oh,
by?
thank you. I will see you at that meeting. You know, it's really weird.
It's the Mitch Hedberg thing. When someone gives you a flyer, it's like they're saying, here, you throw this away. They're I don't know. I think that, I don't know. It's funny. Like, do you understand sort of my point of where I see the redemption for this one coming from? Like, I think it's a bad episode, but I don't know if tweaks would have changed anything to it. It's just very odd. So we can talk about the Worf story, which the Worf story actually torpedoes the episode for me because of how stupid it is. Like, I'm going along, I'm kind of like, this is a 2 out of 5. And then the Worf story happens and it's definitely a 1 out of 5 for me, to spoil the ending of what this rating is. But his story is so manipulative and like it's clearly written in there to get them out of this story and make you feel bad for Worf. And he's never mentioned anything like this before. This is a very brutal story that everyone sort of like passes the buck on for Mikhail or whatever this kid's name is that died. And it just comes across as like they wrote it in there because they needed Worf to be redeemed at the end. We learned something about him, and then it just ties everything up neatly, and Dax is allowed to again be in a relationship with him, even though being in a relationship with Worf seems like it's a pretty abusive thing at that point. Like it's tough to save him by then. So what'd you think of Worf's little story?
I thought it was terrible. It sort of is a good illustration of what I'm talking about him being very passive and not actually involved in what the problem is, because they're basing all of his actions on something that we don't know about and we can't possibly care about.
Right.
Like that story at the end is not going to. It does not really inform anything he's done. You know, you are by that metric. The story that they're telling with Worf is that he doesn't do things because one time, but way before we knew him, he did do something and it turned out bad. So now he just doesn't do things.
Right.
And that's not very interesting.
No, I feel you can draw a better idea of who Worf is through all the previous episodes of Star Trek we've seen with him. Like this
100%.
one story.
Yeah, you don't need it.
Yeah, this one story is unnecessary. It's more, Worf doesn't need that story because he could really just describe his own character in that moment and it would make more sense. And instead it's just, it's almost a parody. Like Amy laughed out loud when he was like, I looked down and he was dead. Like it's like, it's just this goofy, almost a dark comic parody of what his story should actually be. And the fact that he died is just ridiculous. But I agree that basing it on Worf having trouble distinguishing what he is as a person, whether or not he's like a full Klingon or he's adopted these Federation values, fits better in that moment and makes Dax, and I would believe that Dax would relate to that better than this stupid story that he tells her.
Yeah, and it's also kind of inconsistent with the way he's been presented up to this point, because like before this episode, I've never felt that Worf is actively trying to repress anything. Right. Like he's trying to be a Klingon, yes, and that has certain parameters on it that he's trying to follow. But I've never felt like he's actively repressing having a good time or actively repressing showing emotion to people in certain way. Like there have been plenty of episodes where he's been kind of out there a little bit, and it's never been an issue because he had a flashback to that time he killed a kid by accident. Yeah. You know? Yeah. It's and I think you're right. I think just him talking about his character would be much more effective because it's something everybody who watches the show can relate to because they're aware of that's what it is. Yeah. And it also makes their argument have a little bit more meat to it because she can call him on his bullshit and then he can describe his character and she can be like, well, yeah, that's not entirely true because, and then call, you know, the argument then has more weight to it instead of just a one-sided thing. And then they give him the get out of jail free card because one time he killed somebody. Right. Yeah.
Just after as we were lining up for a corner kick, it just makes me laugh.
It's like, you know, it's like if you got into an argument with your significant other and then all of a sudden they're like, you have no idea what I've been through. When I was 5, I accidentally killed my friend. And you're like, what? Honey, I just asked if you could please put the dishes away. It's not. It
doesn't feel like that would ramp down the conversation. That would only ramp things up. I think like that would not close out your argument. That would be like, are you what are you?
It's like, do you remember in Arrested Development when they're all being really mean to Lucille or something, and then she just goes, oh, they've all been secretly talking about how she's a terrible mother, and then she, you know, get into a situation where she does something shitty, and then she just goes, I'm the most terrible mother, and then everyone goes, you're not the most terrible mother, you know, that it's that it's
she's
that
aware
kind of thing
of it.
where it's just it's I mean, I know he's not doing this, but it feels like he's just making himself a martyr so someone will feel bad for him.
I think is there anything else you wanted to talk about with this one, or do you think we should go to final thoughts?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I had written on my notes, this episode feels like Darmok and Greg, which I thought was a fun joke. Because the end of the episode when they're talking, it's like it seems like the setup for a different pilot. Yeah, where it's like the freewheeling Dax and the uptight Worf. How will they ever find out? How will they ever coexist in the same apartment as a relationship? And then I was like, that's basically Dharma and Greg. Yeah. Yep. And then, you know, one step further and you've got comedy gold.
It is on a production level not easy to shoot on the beach. Everything looks like shit. Yeah. They should just not. They should really just try to avoid doing that. Vanessa Williams, we haven't even talked about. Vanessa Williams is in this episode for some reason. Man,
I had a huge crush on her when I was a kid.
Yeah, she does look good in this one too. I think they've now confirmed the fact that Curzon died having sex with her, I guess, which seems odd because the flashback in Emissary, he did not seem like, I didn't see Vanessa Williams riding him as he was on that table there getting the Dax symbiote moved over.
Well, hey, you know, you never know what was going on.
You can't show some things on TV, but she's in it for no reason. It's kind of it feels like a very dated 90s guest star of the week thing where she's like the beach counselor or something like that. And
also worst alien makeup they've ever done.
Yeah. So like a white sticker.
It's just like they went down the line with like a rubber stamp and just started hitting people in the forehead.
Well, I do have one thing I want to talk about. Okay, so what happens here is Worf causes this terrorist attack that basically doesn't kill anybody, but it causes it to rain for a couple days in a row. Yeah. Everyone, after a couple days, looks like they are on the verge of suicide with how much this rain has affected them. Is the fundamentalist essentialist correct in that these people can't actually handle a bad thing that's about to happen to them?
Kinda.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to look at it that way. Yeah, I think the more accurate way or the more impactful way to handle it would have been like if it was raining all the time, so everyone was just in their rooms having sex or something, where it was like, great, now we don't even have to go outside, like a Grinch situation where he takes all the presents and everybody still celebrates Christmas anyway. I
liked Quark. I mean, maybe it's just the fact that once you get inundated with something, it loses its luster. I like in the fact that you're in a world where you can basically give someone a statue and they'll have sex with you. Quark is like, you can't play hoverball inside.
Yes.
That's just not. I like that there's an audience for hoverball. Everyone is so fucked out at this point that they're like, I'm going to go watch a sporting event inside, even though I don't care for it. Yeah. Tiring stuff that they're going on.
At this point, I would go back and retell my fish and chip story from Jamaica, but you guys can go back and listen to other podcasts to hear that.
I think we're done. With that. So we're going to take a break, play an audio clip. We'll come back, read some patron thoughts, give our final thoughts about Let He Who Is Without Sin.
You know, from the age of 7, I was raised by humans on the farm world of Gault. It was a sparsely populated world, no more than 20,000 inhabitants. It often seemed as though everyone knew everybody else. But one thing was for certain. Everybody knew me. I was the Klingon child, the uncontrollable one. I was the biggest, the strongest, the most fearless child on the entire planet. I fought hard, played hard, did as I pleased.
What changed?
When I was 13, I was captain of my school soccer team. We had made the championships, and I was determined to win. Near the end of the second half, with the score tied, my team got a corner kick. The ball sailed up high. Both I and one of my opponents, a human boy named Mikkel, leapt up to head the ball. He had position, but I was determined to score. I remember laughing with excitement as I threw myself at him.
Go on.
The next thing I knew, the ball was sailing into their goal. I roared with triumph and turned around to Mikkel to gloat, only to find him lying in the grass, bleeding. Our heads had collided when we both went up for the ball. I had not felt the impact, but I had broken his neck, and he died the next day.
All right, everybody. So if you support the show on patreon.com/the Pensky File, you can leave your thoughts about upcoming episodes. We'll read them and react to them. Holly McLaughlin says, let he who is without sin, even in the future, political orientations will always be with us. The best part is how they made the new Essentialists reasonable with non-lunatic arguments. Struggle is a big part of what makes us human, so what happens to a society privileged enough to relegate the struggling to a minority? Does it matter that the minority is made up of volunteers? Great fodder for moral reflection, which is one of the things that Star Trek is best at. Holly might have seen the best side of the rose, I think, in that story.
I was going to say, what episode did she watch?
Stephen Koff says, let he who is without sin. Fun episode. So very Worf. Quark became a bit too stereotypical Yiddish complainer in the shuttle at the beginning, but the rest was fine. I can't decide if it makes sense Worf was so willing to collaborate with the Essentialists or if it was out of character. I felt that Dax did a good job acting in this. Not a lot of the wise old man on the surface, more of the young woman is out for display. However, the maturity of her decisions, like not being dragged down by Worf, dismissing the Essentialists and recognizing them for what they are, and finally forcing Worf to communicate with her about his adolescent homicide, felt like the logic thought process of a mature person with a lot of life experience under her belt. No way to say this. Well, let me finish this and then you can feedback. No way to say this without coming across as sexist, but Dax in the bathing suit, Dax in the bathing suit was hardly comparable in beauty to stellar phenomena. Oh, okay, yeah, right. So Worf compares her to the star. Maybe it was racy in the 90s, but the attention they drew to her taking off her cover-up resulted in an okay, so what, and not a jobbing draw. I think it's the first time I've ever seen it's not a shirt that's taken off, it's her pants that are taken off, and like have a character react to that. It was very strange. It was a reversal.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that it's like, it is supposed to be this big reveal, but you're already like 50% there.
Yeah, she's wearing a lifeguard swimsuit. It's not like a bikini or anything. She's just wearing a full bathing suit. It's like the most modest bathing suit.
If she'd been wearing like a full body coverall or something, it might have been more of a moment.
I mean,
not that she is not a very attractive woman, but you know,
everyone should be naked on this planet, right? Like that's the way. That's what you're trying to imply going on here. It's weird that they all have swimsuits. They obviously can't shoot it that way, but that would be the way that it would happen.
Yeah, or barely there.
Right. Yes, more like the Justice Planet in TNG. Did you have something you wanted to say? Yeah.
Well, the other thing I was going to say was, do you think it would make more sense if the fundamentalists turned out to be the Maquis?
And why would they be doing that?
Is that not sort of? Well, I guess that's not really the same thing. They're about different things, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't think of any moral component or any sort of like conservative component to the Maquis, if that's where you're leaning towards.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know. I was just trying to think of a way that they would be less, that it would add a little bit some more juice to it, where like that it would be a big deal that Worf was agreeing with them, because it's not really a big deal. But
I like the Bajoran angle. If they were Bajorans who had some sort of thing, I think Worf doing that would make a lot of sense. Let he who is without sin. This is a comment from Christian Pouch. Let he who is without sin skip this episode, #change my view. I understand they want to flesh out Worf's backstory, but the whole episode seems ridiculous and farcical, and Worf comes off like an asshat. It's a weak 2 out of 5. Some contradictory opinions here from the listeners. Kyle Barrett, let he who is without sin. I feel like the relative success of looking for Parmok in all the wrong places may have made the writers disillusioned as to what sort of places the show should go. Nothing in the episode works. It's weird, creepy, awkward, and ridiculous. And while you can see what they wanted to explore with Worf, the execution is terrible and he comes across as a complete prick. I also think it was a mistake to have the villain say things like, "Heaven help us." I can see what they were going for, but religious dialogue sticks out like a sore thumb in Star Trek. Although, having said all of that, and maybe this is just me, but I thought Worf's soccer injury story might be the most unintentionally hilarious thing in all of Star Trek. It almost makes the episode worth it. Almost. Poindexter G. Go ahead.
Religious dialogue sticks out like a sore thumb, but soccer dialogue just fits right in.
It does. They're on a string of these things. They said Thursday in a couple episodes ago, and now they've said corner kick from soccer, which is just even more absurd. Poindexter G says, let he who is without sin. How is Worf still in Starfleet after this? He essentially helps terrorists hijack the weather control system of a Federation planet. Somehow everyone's reaction to this is, well, this is a bit of a bother. So much for my vacation. Vanessa Williams stars in a role that's basically just, we have a famous person willing to be on DS9, so we must show her off. It is true.
Also,
go ahead.
I was just going to say also, Worf's thing in this episode is basically, it's more of a Spock thing, isn't it? Because it's basically the same thing that they gave to Spock in the Kelvin movies, where he's like extra Vulcan because one time he punched a guy. You know,
right?
It's a little weird. Sorry, didn't mean.
Yeah, he's that's true. It's a good point, and I guess they tied in with the story a little bit there. But we kind of touched on that. I don't think I can really expand. Matthew Ross says, this is the last one, I think. Let me see. Yes, the last one. Matthew Ross says, let he who is without sin be like the rest of us and avoid the episode. I do so hate this one. Please someone take the pole out of Worf's ass. Clearly he needs a super big gulp of prune juice and maybe an enema. An episode that should have been called Ruining It for Everyone, exploring when a conservative political movement hates on a carefree vacation resort with a false equivalency. Man, I get so mad when I see this episode I want to scream. This surpasses fascination for a terrible story. Just because people have a good time does not make them weak. The only point you can take from that is that Lita is more of a regular character and likes Rom. The more advanced the mind, the more the need for play, as was said in TOS's Shore Leave. Speaking of which, let us leave this episode behind and cast it into the fires of oblivion. Yeah, I mean, maybe we should just touch on this. So, I don't know if I'm disagreeing with Matt here, but I think that the fundamental problem here, if we haven't touched on it enough, is that I don't really understand the point of the Essentialists. Like I do understand what they're talking about, but I don't understand how this is a fundamental thing that ties into the fact that, you shouldn't have a vacation at the same time. It feels like they're more workaholics than anything else. Like, it's like you got to be out there doing your job when things are going to go bad. Otherwise, things are really going to go bad. And I don't feel they're grounded enough. Maybe they're, as Cal was saying, they're trying to do things like add heaven help us to the dialogue, but it comes across as muddled.
What if instead of having the fundamentalists at all, you take your cold open and instead of spending it with gossipy relationship talk, establish that maybe, excuse me, maybe something has just happened that Worf feels responsible for.
Yes.
And so then you send them down to this planet and then he comes to these realizations on his own instead of so like he's got this thing on his mind. So when they get a report that, some outpost had just been destroyed or some shit like that by the Dominion. So then they go down to the planet and Worf can't relax. A, because I guess he killed some kid, or take that out, and it's it's part of his character. But also B, he's concerned about being unprepared for the Dominion. So then he is internally, naturally generating these feelings of you people are just literally fucking around. Right. What's going to happen when the Dominion come? Like that, have it go from there instead of having it be an external force pressed onto him.
Yeah, that's funny because I feel that is part of the series, but they don't really hammer it home all that frequently. Yeah. Like, I feel that Dominion do exist as a constant threat in the background of this show in a way that on TNG and stuff you didn't really have. They don't. The episodic nature of it conflicts with that a little bit because a lot of the episodes don't touch on it at all, and it seems like people don't really care about it. But maybe if you're considering this more of a serialized thing than it is, you probably would see that, I suppose. Like I think you're right that you'd want kind of a light reminder of what's going on, but I do feel that it's built into what's already there, and it would be easy to do that. So if you had a planet that got attacked by the Jem'Hadar or something, you could easily skew off into this thing.
Yeah.
So what are you going to give this one? Our scale of 1 to 5?
I'm going to give it a 1. I think I really hated this episode.
You sound like it's the worst. You sound like it's the worst episode you've seen in a long time.
It for me it is. I really, really dislike this episode. I don't even know. See, the problem is though, I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's the worst episode as far as quality goes, because it's probably better than some in the first and second season. It's not like storyline wise, it's boring and ham-fisted, but it's not egregiously terrible. But I don't know. I just really think it's at this point in the show, this is not the kind of story. This is not, if they're going to tell this story, they should be smarter about it. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
I'd agree. It's a bigger mistake to be in your 5th year and put out an episode like this than to be in your 1st year and put out a similar episode. Yeah. Because they clearly know what the tone of the show is. Like, they've been doing good episodes with it. They know what will work. It's weird that they thought that this could potentially have some kind of impact that work. It's a little thing of Ira Bear. He tends to like this kind of stuff, and I don't know if it ever really pays off for him in a lot of ways. I'm also going to give it a 1. It is pretty bad. This is, to rest your mind, this is easily the worst episode of the season. So we got that out of the way. And I think that that's about it. It's a 1 for me. It doesn't really work on any level. I think that the Worf storyline is kind of okay. They just approach it horribly. Like, every angle going into Worf is a bad idea. And the pleasure planet of Risa continues to never quite live up to what people are trying to tell me that it is. And I think they should just avoid that place. Maybe mention
Has this place shown up before?
It has in TNG. Captain's Holiday. Picard goes there.
I don't remember that. Anyway.
Yep. That's about it. I'm going to give it a 1. Clay will give it a 1. Worst episode of the season so far. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. Facebook, Twitter, all those things. Discord, if you want to actually talk. You can go to Discord channel. Patreon.com/the Pensky File if you want to support the show there. A couple extra bucks, you get extra stuff. And then, I won't say rate the show on iTunes anymore. If you're out there perusing the internet and you're on Reddit or something like that, and you see what's this Star Trek podcast you listen to, why not plug this podcast? That'd be much appreciated. Some kind listener did that on Reddit recently, and I think that is probably more effective than the ratings and everything. Kind of self-obvious, but thank you to that Redditor. I won't blow up your name or anything. I don't have it available, but thank you for leaving feedback about the show. Thank you for bringing it to other people's attentions. Much appreciated. And if you guys would want to do that, or you see any kind of internet thing where you can mention the show, and if you think that the show is worth mentioning, please do. Helps out a great deal. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I guess the final issue of Poser's out right now. If you guys want to pick that up, I'd be much obliged. And hopefully we'll be back with some more Batman Badass fairly soon. No definite date, but I may as well throw it out there. But that's about it for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's it. We're working on a somewhat new show that'll come out potentially soon, probably before the end of the month, because they're pretty easy to record. So that's working in the fires.
Dry politics is what it's going to be. Dry foreign politics.
It's going to be Hannity and, was it Hannity and Combs? Was that the original thing, or Crossfire
I think
on
so,
CNN?
yeah.
We're just going to do our own version of that and really get blown up. I think that's it. Let He Who Is Without Sin. We both gave it a 1. Pretty bad episode. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for leaving your comments. Ooh, Discovery is now in full swing too. This will be the first episode that'll air while Discovery is running. So hopefully we're enjoying that. You guys can also check that out. I would also
like to say they have just recently announced that Georgiou is getting her own show.
Mm-hmm. Section 31 show.
That's going to be, we're going to have, assuming that all of these shows flourish and do not get canceled, we're going to have Discovery, Lower Decks, the Untitled Picard show, and a Georgiou show. At the very least, 4 more Star Trek shows.
Well, there's also a Starfleet Academy show, and there's another animated series that they're making. There are 2 animated series.
So there's like 6 more Star Trek shows in the works. I don't know. Are we going to cover all of these shows?
No, there's
because I'm like, just reading that is making me like tense in the chest. Not that I don't enjoy doing this, but
if I had to rank them, the Picard show is clearly number 1 for me.
Yes.
In doing coverage. And then they would sort of skitter out after that. I have not much interest in the animated series. Starfleet Academy doesn't sound very interesting. The new short treks are easy, but it definitely on the horizon. The Picard show is my number 1 most interested show out of all of them that we're going to, that I would assume we're going to be covering at that point when it comes out next year.
Yeah, I would say Picard is number 1. I don't think the Georgiou show is necessarily, I don't know. It just seems like it's going to be more Discovery, more of the same kind of vibe of that.
Yep.
It might be interesting to do the Lower Decks just to look at what comedy looks like, if it's just straight comedy.
Those are also short, I'd assume. They have to be probably 22-minute episodes.
Yeah, but the only reason I would be excited about this is just because it means that we don't have to cover Voyager.
Yes, that's the other thing. We might be at a point where we will jump after we're done with DS9, which is still another little ways away, quite a ways away. Voyager will not be waiting for us in the wings because we'll have all this other Star Trek that'll be popped up at that point. I feel like there was something else I wanted to. Oh, just before we go, I'm rewatching. It doesn't matter because Discovery's already started. I'll mention this on some other video or something. But did a Discovery rewatch, which has been
glutton for punishment.
Yeah, so I don't have enough going on. That's about it. We're done with this. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for supporting the show, and we will see you next time with Things Past. Is the next episode? I'm pretty sure. Things Past. Yes. So we will see you in a couple days. Thanks.